Hi everyone, today we have with us Sue Everett. She's the volunteer coordinator of the Venus Project. She's also the point of contact for Spain and she's also on the admin team for TVP support on a global level. And she also coordinates the Spanish language team for the Linguistic Team International. So Sue, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
I'm fine as well, thank you.
Good. I'd just like to clarify that first coordinator bit. I'm not quite sure what it refers to, but the point of contact for Spain, part of the admin team for TVP support, and the coordinator for the Spanish linguistic team. That's all correct, yeah. And then I stick my nose into other teams as well just to see how things are moving along, because I need to be able to tell the other points of contact, you know, hey, listen, we've got this happening, that happening, and so on. So I'm also in groups with the social media team, the graphics team, and so on.
Okay, great. So today we're going to talk a bit about the Venus project. Could you give us a brief overview of what is the Venus project and what are its main goals and proposals for the people who don't know about it?
Okay. Well, the Venus project is a proposal for changing how we manage society, how we manage things on the planet. It's much more than the round cities that people tend to see. You know, we've got the images all over of the round cities, but it's much more than that, much more than the design of the cities, much more than the technology. It's a holistic approach that includes re-educating ourselves so that our beliefs and our behaviors and our values become saner, so that we can have a much better society. But it all is included, you know, the environment that we live in influences our behavior, which we'll talk about in another question that you have coming up. So we need to create a sane environment so that we behave in a saner way and our values are saner.
So, as far as I understand it, the economic model in which it is based or would be based that is known as a resource-based economy, wouldn't use any money, and people would simply have immediate access to goods and services, everything they need to sustain themselves physically, and also education, arts, sports, and so on, right?
Yeah, exactly. We don't need money anymore because we can outgrow the scarcity, which is sometimes real and sometimes created or perceived. It's not real. And that was the reason for the creation of money in the first place, basically. We needed some means of interchange, you know, some means of barter, something to be able to get what we needed, but that there wasn't enough of for everybody. So it's been different things along the history of mankind. It's been salt, shells, you know, and then eventually we got to use money, and it's become such a pillar of society that we can't, or a lot of people can't imagine a world without money, but it's a pillar which is crumbling. We don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
And we can produce enough goods and services for everybody because we have the technology, so we can produce enough for everybody, in which case we don't need money.
Okay, so as far as I understand, Jacques Fresco, who was the creator of the Venus Project, he was not at all an utopian, right? So he doesn't defend political systems like communism, socialism, or any kind of anarchism, right?
Yeah, exactly. The political systems don't approach the problems and look for solutions that we really need. They try to fix things by using the same methods as we've always had, which is basically laws. And the laws are broken when it doesn't serve the interests of the establishment. The politicians are the first ones that are corruptible and can change the laws. You know, you can have one government that comes in and makes one law to protect the environment, for example, and then the government changes, we get another point of view, and they can undo all those laws. So the laws are useless, really. You know, we're seeing this very strongly now in the United States with Trump undoing a lot of the protection laws that were made. You know, so what good are laws? And there's, just this morning I saw one of the viral images on Facebook that I wrote down for this question. There is no aberrant behavior if your society is operated in accordance with scientific education. When people speculate, argue, and inflict violence, rather than to learn how to pose and answer questions, there is something wrong with your culture. The state spends most of the budget on military expenditure. There is something wrong with your culture, and that is politics.
Yeah, and another very interesting aspect of Jack's thinking and about the TVP is that he always said that there is no such thing as an utopia, and this also differentiates TVP from communism and socialism and so on, and that things will never be perfect, and we would also have new problems to solve and so on, and new technology would be developed, and we would expand continually our scientific knowledge, and that this scientific knowledge and the new technologies should be applied to every aspect of society, including human behavior. So what he's basically saying, and that is different from communism, socialism, and so on, is that, of course, we would never reach a point of perfection in terms of a system, right?
Yeah. Well, the word utopia, you may have heard Jack say this already, the word utopia basically suggests something that is completed, something that is reached and final and perfect. And the resource-based economy would be an evolving society, because we would always be learning new things and inventing new technology and so on. And so it couldn't be static. It would always be growing. So the word utopia is not applicable to this. And the technology, there's nothing to fear from the technology in a resource-based economy mindset, because it would only be used for human and environmental well-being. You know, not like today where we worry about technology because it goes towards making guns and things to kill. You know, they're already talking about wars in space. Now, what sort of a mentality is that? Instead of looking to solve problems, to look for peace, to bridge the difference between nations, they're already thinking about we're going to have wars in space. So they can then spend more money on more weapons and so on. It's mad. And all that kind of mentality just has to go.
Yeah, and just to make it a bit clearer for people who don't know, in the model Jack Fresco created, so it would be based on a cybernetic system, a central cybernetic system that would then coordinate the distribution of goods and services to all people, right?
Well, the cybernation refers to the joining of computers with the machines. And so that's where the automation comes in. And so automatically, based on data that is collected, we can see how much of what needs to be produced. For example, if we have a city of 10,000 people and 5,000 people want to eat lettuces, then we will know to produce enough lettuces for 5,000 people. We do that already today. The supermarkets already know how many products they have to replace on the shelves by the amount that is bought. You know, and it would be the same, but it would be on a global scale. And it's not necessarily that it's all central, but it's all connected.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, because people get this, central, there's only going to be one, and what happens if it goes wrong? Well, if it really did go wrong, we could unplug it, but it's the connectedness. It's not that it's all in one place type thing.
Yeah, and another aspect that I really like about TVP, and that really differentiates it from other political and economical proposals, is that Jack, at least as far as I know it, always said that we could never be sure that the cities he projected or the resource-based economy would really work until the moment we put it to the test, as we do with other things using the scientific approach, right? Project and then experiment. And of course we could have right away certain predictions based on what we know from science, But of course, this is not to deny its plausibility. But I'm just asking if he really said that we would have to put it to experimentation according to the scientific method to see if it really would work according to his predictions.
Yes, we do. It is an experiment. It's a social experiment. So I suppose you could say at the moment it's a hypothesis, but it's a hypothesis that is based on a lot of evidence that is already out there and scientifically accepted. You know, there's many studies that have been conducted and scientists talking about certain aspects of what TVP proposes, but they haven't joined the pieces together like the Venus Project has done. You know, we know that human behavior is manipulable, it's shapeable through education and a sane environment. Today, we have the values and the behavior that we have because of the environment, this crazy capitalist system that we have, and it produces a lot of negative behavior. But it is proven that if you are in an environment that is saner, your behavior becomes saner. I mean, let's think about it. Unless you're mentally ill, all right, which is another topic. If you have everything provided for you, you're not going to want to run out and rob in a supermarket, for example, because you have everything you need. So there's solid grounds for seeing that a resource-based economy can work. It won't be from one day to the next, obviously, and there will be problems at the beginning, and it will take time. But with determination and continuing to study the problems and looking for solutions, we can get through them. It's going to be a progress. It's taken us thousands of years to get into the mess that we are now. We're not going to change it just like that. We need to work on it. But if we can help people get a more scientific mindset and we can provide them with everything they need, we've got half of the battles won, more than half of the battles won, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so another difference that I found between TVP and the other economical proposals and so on is that it doesn't divide humanity into random groups of people and then pits one against the other. I mean, it struggles to see what is common among all human beings, and that all people have problems, albeit some people have problems different than other people, but it doesn't treat, for example, rich people like pricks and poor people like saints, or vice versa, right?
I'm sorry, the last two examples you gave, it doesn't reach people like?
It doesn't treat rich people like pricks and poor people like saints, or vice versa, right?
Saints?
Saints, yeah.
As in holy saints?
Yes.
Well, what is a holy saint?
No, what I wanted to mean is that it doesn't treat any group of people like if they were, for example, as communism does, that says that rich people are all bastards or something like that.
Right. Okay.
And what I mean is that TVP says that all people in the current system have problems.
Yes.
Even if different from one another, and it doesn't pit a group of people against the other, right?
Exactly, yes, exactly. The Venus Project proposes that everybody has their needs covered. And the problems that we face today are global. Okay, so you've got one particular state in America that might have problems with the water that is being polluted and so on. And then in another state, you've got, another problem. But when you look at the root causes of those problems, they come from the same problems, basically, which really far down is scarcity. Mm-hmm. So if we can overcome the scarcity, which we can with technology today, then we can eliminate many of those problems. And everybody, whether they're rich or whether they're poor, they're all victims of their culture, of their education, of their environment. So even the rich pricks are victims of how they've been brought up, of the beliefs that they have. So we must understand the effect of the environment on human behavior. This is very, very important. Otherwise we get these hate moments. We get people pointing fingers against one group of people. They're the fault of this and it's their fault for that. No, it's the system that is at fault, that provokes these problems.
Okay, so now I'm going to make two criticisms of the Venus Project. The first one is that, at least as far as I understand it, that the model for human psychology that it is based on is the behavioristic one, coming from people like John B. Watson, B.F. Skinner, and so on, right? So the first criticism here is twofold. On the one hand, since more or less the 50s and 60s, the psychological model espoused by behaviorism has been questioned, and now we have many branches of psychology that solidly ground a completely different view of the human mind and psychology. Notably, for example, that we have some, not all, of course, innate predispositions and proclivities. They don't say that genetics determines anything, but rather that it predisposes us to certain things, certain behaviors. And then, of course, all people acknowledge the influence coming, as you said, from culture, environment, other people, our experiences, and so on. But what I really want to say is that, and again, I really respect Jack for having said that we should put his hypothesis to the test. But I mean, regarding this aspect of human psychology, wouldn't you say that perhaps, since it is still an hypothesis and it has certain predictions about it, that we could perhaps update a bit the model it is based of the human mind?
Well, I think to a certain point you answer your own question, because you're saying predisposition, you're talking about predisposition, but predisposition doesn't mean predetermined. So even if there is a violent gene, for example, James Gilligan speaks about the violent gene. He worked with the most violent criminals in the States, in prisons. But he said if the circumstances don't trigger it, it doesn't come into play, it doesn't activate. And people who've been violent, there is a prison in Norway where they have some extremely violent criminals, but they treat them humanely. Instead of treating them like animals as they do in the States, they treat these people humanely, they give them respect. And the attitude of these people changes completely until they can, not all of them, but many of them can become reinserted into society. So even if certain genes do exist, it doesn't mean that a person is going to behave in a certain way because of their genes. Epigenetics over genetics. Epigenetics is very strong, and you mentioned Sapolsky in the notes that you sent to me.
Yes.
Sapolsky talks about behavior and so on, but one of his experiments with his tribe of baboons was very interesting. When the males, the aggressive males, died because they ate poisoned food, and all that were basically left were the women and the females, the female baboons, and the non-alpha males, the gentler males, and the society changed completely. They were no longer an aggressive baboon tribe, and when males came from outside, even if they came with aggressive tendencies, after a while they learned not to be aggressive, and such habits as grooming each other, which apparently males don't do, grooming each other and looking after the babies and so on, came into play. So it still shows that the environment, the effect of the environment is tremendously important. And I think if that is the main influence, then as time goes on, we can study differences to try and figure out how to get over those problems. But for the moment, the biggest influence does seem to be the environment. And so that's what we want to look at first. And then we can look into the subcategories, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense? Did that answer your question?
Yes, I think it does. I will just add perhaps a follow-up question to that. That is, of course, everyone, no scientist denies that the environment has a lot of influence in human behavior. It's just that people discuss among themselves, particularly psychologists and so on, the weight genes and environment have on certain behaviors and certain ways of thinking and so on and so forth. And of course, there are many people nowadays that say that, of course, the environment had to add a lot of influence in human behavior because, for example, since the Industrial Revolution and since the values of the Enlightenment, reason, science, humanism and so forth were put into place, human societies changed a lot. And since some centuries ago, we've seen we've seen a lot of reduction in crime rates and so on, mainly in the more affluent societies, so where people have more access to knowledge and resources, as the Venus Project espouses. So I mean that I think that's all right. But perhaps what I was trying to arrive at here is, since the Venus Project wouldn't have a system of law into place and wouldn't have ideally any kind of police and prisons and so on, just to have an thought experiment here. What if, for example, these really innate predispositions people have would lead to, even if only a very few number of people, to try to exploit the system, and this new environment wouldn't really have all the positive effects we would expect to have on them. What could be done about it?
Okay, well, to start with, when the cities begin to be built, when we get the first city or when we get the new research centre, which is what they're looking towards now, we can't just open the gates to everybody, because otherwise we're going to get all that primordial slime, as Jack used to call it. We're going to bring all that crap with us. We have to have a period of education so that people can understand and begin to change. We can't let people in that have really, really toxic ideas still. We need to help them get over that. All right, so we're not going to have people in the societies that are, I don't know, I don't want to offend anybody, but we wouldn't have sort of, for example, a real die-hard capitalist coming in. He's going to have to change his capitalist ideas before he can come in.
Well, perhaps we could say that at the beginning we would try to avoid having more problematic people, right?
Well, it's not, I don't know if I would say it that way. I would say more that we would educate people before they come in. I mean, when we first discovered the Venus Project, most of us have got, I would say all of us have still got loads of stupid ideas in our heads, and we still have, even when we start learning about the Venus Project. We all need that cerebral enema that Jack tries to give us, you know. So this is what we need. We need a lot of people that have had a good clean out of the shit, that have had that cerebral enema, and that are more prepared to begin this new society. All right. So that means that people who've really got strange ideas, they won't be able to change. Some people just won't be able to change the way they're thinking, you know. So Eventually, over time, these people will die out, just as the people from the Inquisition died out, you know. And then gradually we get saner and saner people. And for example, with children, Jack gives a very nice example with children. If there's a child who has aberrant behavior, is a problematical child, the idea would be to put that child in contact with a group of slightly older children who have already changed their values and who can be an example to him. And as they're slightly older, and maybe they have some kind of a skill that that child admires, then he will look up to them and want to imitate them. Mm-hmm. And so when that child becomes adapted, one can move out of the group and they can bring another child in. So gradually we can go re-educating the behavior of the children. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if we've got quite on a different tangent. So, but it does have to be eventually global, because one of the fundamental ideas of the Venus Project is that we have to declare all the world's resources as the common heritage of all the world's people, mm-hmm. because that's the only way we're going to be able to really manage them sanely, wisely, for the benefit of everybody, you know. So that's why it has to be global. And as far as people who are really, really conditioned to this society, obviously we're all conditioned to this society, but those who support a resource-based economy, at least we've begun to see that the current system's not working and understand that a change is possible. So if we can understand it, others can too, you know. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, why do we bother telling people about it?
Yeah.
If it's not possible to get people to understand, why do we've understood it, you know. So one of the biggest problems that we have to overcome is the lack of relevant information people have, because there's so much bullshit out there, you know, false information and politicians feeding our heads with hate stories and with, you know, we've got to go to war and all this kind of crap. So we need to get relevant information out to people to help them understand this change is possible. At least put it to the test. What we've got now isn't working. Mm-hmm. You know, yeah. So what we're afraid of change because it takes us out of what we know. But we have to change because it's so evident that what we're doing is not working. You know, so we've got to change. So why not try this? It's not just something that was thought up over a weekend. It's come after decades of experiment, invention, traveling, studying. You know, it's something that's really got a lot of fundament, is that an English word? A lot of basis to it.
Basis,
yeah. You know, so let's give it a try. Why not? Hell, we can't carry on this path that we are.
Yeah, and I mean, Jack also said, as we already talked about here, that we should experiment on it, right? Because we could never be sure if it would really work or not until we did the experiment.
Yeah.
But I mean, I read a book by a guy called Jas Garcia called The First Civilization, and I would like to talk about this just for the simple fact that in that book, in the last part of it, he talks about a very specific plan he created and he wrote down to try to implement the Venus Project or a resource-based economy, because the entire book is obviously based on Jack's ideas and the idea for a resource-based economy and so on and so forth. But I mean, what he says basically is that we would have a first city put into place, and we would have also a team of scientists, of volunteer scientists working there to see if everything would go according to the predictions or not. And first of all, we would put there, and now I will use again the same word because it goes along what he says, the least problematic people. He talks specifically about people who, for example, don't have any crime in the registry, people who were not in prisons, people who didn't have any kind of mental illness, just to have this first group of people with whom it would be easier to work, and then progressively and step by step adding new people, and of course we would also have the educational aspect, as you referred to, and step by step including other people in the first city, and then bit by bit creating new cities and expanding over the world. So I mean, of course we already talked about this here more or less, but could you add something to this thing I exposed now?
Well, I hadn't heard of the book before, so I can't comment on it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the plan is, the more detailed plan that this person has than what TVP suggests, because TVP does have a plan, but you can't make certain specifications if you don't have a crystal ball. You know, because you just don't know what the future is going to bring. And TVP has a lot of good ideas, but it doesn't have a crystal ball. But it's, as we said before, you know, Jack has talked about this. The thing is that a lot of the things are in different lectures. It's not that there's necessarily one lecture that talks about a specific topic. There are many that talk about specific topics, but there are a lot of ideas that you get from watching and listening to other things, and then you begin to understand how it fits together. So yes, obviously the first city or the first cities will have to be necessarily scientifically or technologically minded people who can work on the problems that we will discover as we go along. You know, we don't know things that can go wrong. We can look as much as possible into it, which I think Jack has done. But there will be things happen. Maybe one of the machines overproduces for some reason, you know. So we're going to have people who are capable of solving those problems, and we're also going to have psychologists or specialists in human behavior to do that. And then, yes, but gradually, as the cities become more and more, then we can go including more and more people, but always having had that pre-education phase. That's very important, and which we have started already with the Socio-Cyberdynamic Education Project, which is creating mentors to be able to prepare more people to be ready to move into the new society. Mm-hmm. So this and it kind of amuses me that people think that they can. I don't want to insult anybody here, but there's a lot of people who haven't really joined with the Venus Project that think they have a better idea, you know. Well, if you believe in the idea and you think you have a better idea, join with the Venus Project and make it a stronger basis. But all these people that go off and start making their own organizations, their own ideas and so on, this doesn't help. It's creating division instead of creating unity. And what we need is unity. We're not always going to be in agreement with each other, but we need to be able to talk things through and look at things scientifically and logically to get through the problems. But if everybody just keeps going, oh, I don't agree with that, so I'm going to start my own thing.
Yeah, I understand.
Just the other day, there was a guy on Facebook who's made a video, and somebody suggested to him, why don't you contact the Venus Project and join the video team? And the reply was, well, I prefer to work on my own. Well, you know, I mean, we're working towards a collaborative society. So join the team, put your experience to helping others and learn from others, but work with people. All these people off on their own little islands, it really doesn't help. I'm sorry if I've gone off there, but if I've gone off.
No, it's perfectly okay. It's perfectly okay.
That's how I think.
Yeah, so I think it would really be good if people looked at least into the Venus project, because as we talked about here, it has all these really positive aspects and these things that differentiates it from other systems that we already know don't work, other alternatives, right? So before we finished, would you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing right now and what you do to try to promote and educate people about the Venus project?
Okay, well, let me pick up on the word educate. I inform people. Okay, I don't want to say that I educate people, because at the moment I am still being educated myself. I've been around now for about 9 years or so, 10 years since Addendum, and so I've learned a lot, but I'm well aware that there is much more to learn, and I think the more you're around the Venus project, the more you come to realize that. So I'm not educating anybody until I finish the Socio-Cyberneering Education project. Then I can be a mentor. But for now, I consider that I inform people. I share information with people. I show them videos. I, talk about this to people. And as point of contact for Spain, I organize the team such as it is. It's very small at the moment. We have Hangouts, Google Hangouts, once a week for the Spanish speakers, where we talk about resource-based economy and TVP related matters. At the moment, we're reading the book Designing the Future, chapter by chapter. I manage the Facebook. Well, I manage the Facebook. I overlook the Facebook. I've got a wonderful supporter who helps me, who's taken over the Facebook and does a great job, Rafa. He's actually now in the orientation process to become a co-POC with me. And this is something that I, as an admin for TVP support, I'm one of the people who organizes this 21-week orientation process for people who want to become a POC. And in that orientation process, we try to give people the tools to become a successful point of contact. It's a process that has evolved over the 5 or 6 years since we've started it. It's much more in depth than it was before, much more organized, polished. And we have weekly meetings with the candidates. Excuse me. Some of the topics are organizational, such as how to create an event. Which here on the island that I live on, we're organising an event for the 16th of March to do a screening of the Choices Hours. We give them tips on how to organise events, how to manage Facebook, how to answer emails, but then we also study some of the material from the Venus project so that they've got the basic information. Everybody's on the same level with a basic understanding of the Venus project. Competent democracy, human behaviour, city systems, things that are very relevant and that we get a lot of questions about. And then when they become a point of contact, we continue with discussion groups on deeper matters, for example, free will, human and robotic systems, and so on, metaphysics and so on. So that's another part of what I do. And then there's also the linguistic team, which I wish I had a clone to be able to help me with. She's organising the translations. I'm going to make a call out now for people who would like to help us with translations. All the languages need help with the translations. If we don't have translations, we will never be an international organisation. Because at the moment, the great majority of the material comes to us in English, so we need to translate it into other languages. And we also need people who speak English to a very high level. If they're not a native English speaker, that they have at least a very high level of English, and people who are maybe teachers of English who have a good grasp on grammar, punctuation and so on, because the translations are always done from an original English version. This saves the translators hours of time, saves misunderstandings and mistakes. So we do need people who only speak English. Okay, so somebody who doesn't speak another language, you can help us. If your English is good, you can help us with the transcriptions into English. So that's what I do. And then, as I said before, I'm in the social media team, but not as a team member, but more as to keep up to date with what's happening, so that when somebody comes and says, how can I help the Venus Project? Because we get a lot of emails saying, I want to help, but I don't know what to do. Then I can say, well, listen, you've got this team you could join, you've got this team you could join, blah, 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 human resources, whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, great. So I would only like to ask you to send me all the links that you would like me to put on the description box. Okay. And I think it was a great conversation. I hope other people like it, people who watched it later, and then they look into the Venus Project, because I think it is really interesting.
Absolutely.
And so I thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure. You speak very well. You have a nice fluid way of talking and asking questions. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, thank you again. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. If you appreciate my work, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/thedissenter. Thank you.